Welcome back to Fantasy Case Files, where we dive into the darkest corners of magical mayhem and supernatural scandals. I'm your host, Stephen Cross, and today we're examining a case that shook the wizarding world to its very core. A case where a school competition became a death sentence, and where the golden boy of Hufflepuff House discovered that sometimes the most dangerous game isn't played with wands. If you enjoy these deep dives into the shadowy side of magical mysteries, hit the thumbs up button and subscribe for more cases that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about the wizarding world. Now, let's talk about Cedric. Picture this: 17 years old, captain of the Quidditch team, and possessed of the kind of integrity that made professors trust him and the kind of determination that made problems disappear. The kid was basically what would happen if you gave a moral compass human form and taught it to play Quidditch. But here's where our story gets interesting. See, Cedric wasn't just another prefect with a badge. The boy had a brain, and more importantly, he had principles, which, as we'll learn, can be absolutely fatal in the wrong circumstances. The year was 1994. And Hogwarts was hosting the Triwizard Tournament for the first time in over a century. 3 schools, 3 champions, and enough prize money to make a goblin weep with joy. The whole thing was supposed to be a celebration of magical cooperation and international friendship. Instead, it became a masterclass in how to commit the perfect murder, while hundreds of witnesses watched and cheered. The selection process seemed straightforward enough. Drop your name in an ancient goblet, let the magic decide, and hope you don't get picked to face down a dragon before your 18th birthday. Simple, right? Wrong. Because when that goblet spat out 4 names instead of 3, everyone assumed it was just magical malfunction. A bit of ancient magic gone wonky. But Cedric started asking questions. Our golden boy began noticing things. Little things that didn't add up. Like how certain students seemed to know details about upcoming tasks before they were officially announced. Or how ministry officials kept having hushed conversations that stopped the moment anyone got within earshot. Or how the tasks themselves seemed designed less to test magical skill and more to create maximum spectacle and drama. Now, most 17-year-olds would have been too busy trying not to die horribly to notice these details. But Cedric was different. Maybe it was that Hufflepuff sense of fair play making him protective of proper competition. Maybe it was just good old-fashioned curiosity. Or maybe, just maybe, he'd stumbled onto something much bigger and much more dangerous than anyone realized. The first task rolled around, and our 4 champions faced their dragons. Harry Potter somehow managed not to become barbecue, which shocked absolutely no one who'd been paying attention to his track record of impossible survival. Victor Crumb did his thing with typical Bulgarian efficiency. Fleur Delacour proved that French students are just as terrifying as their dragons. And Cedric was brilliant, strategic, brave, and clean in his execution. He tied for first place and should have been celebrating. Instead, witnesses reported seeing him in the library that very evening, surrounded by books about tournament regulations and competition history. Because here's what the Daily Prophet never reported. Cedric had started keeping detailed notes. Not the typical teenage diary full of feelings and Quidditch scores, but a careful log of every irregularity he'd observed, every suspicious conversation he'd overheard, every rule that seemed to bend just a little too conveniently. He'd even started tracking patterns in student gossip and staff behavior. Who knew what before it was announced? Which teachers seemed unusually nervous? Which ministry officials kept showing up at odd hours? The kind of observations that seem innocent individually, but paint a disturbing picture when you put them all together. The second task came and went. Underwater rescues, mer-people politics, and the kind of drama that makes for great entertainment, but questionable education policy. Again, Cedric performed admirably, but again, he spent his free time digging deeper into the tournament's irregularities. And that's when people started paying attention to his questions. Anonymous notes appearing in his dormitory, whispered warnings in empty corridors, his notes mysteriously going missing from his bag, then reappearing with certain pages torn out. Someone wanted Cedric to stop asking questions, stop digging, stop being so inconveniently observant about the whole thing. But threatening a Hufflepuff about fairness and justice, that's like threatening a honey badger. They don't back down, they just get more determined. Which brings us to the third task, and the maze that would become Cedric Diggory's grave. Now, before we dive into that fatal maze, let's talk about what Cedric discovered in those final weeks. Because our golden boy hadn't just been asking casual questions. He'd been conducting the kind of investigation that would have made the Auror office proud if they'd bothered to listen. It started with the conversations. See, Cedric had something most investigators don't. He was genuinely well liked by students from all 4 houses. People talked to him, confided in him, shared things they'd overheard or noticed. And when you're collecting information from dozens of sources, patterns start to emerge. Students were reporting that certain older siblings and family friends seemed unusually interested in tournament details. Not the normal, how's school going interest, but specific questions about security arrangements, task timing, and champion preparation. The kind of questions that suggested someone was placing very specific bets on very specific outcomes. Cedric had been tracking these reports through conversations with friends like Cho Chang, whose family had connections in the magical sports betting community. What they discovered was fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. Someone was making large, precise bets on tournament outcomes. Not just who would win, but specific details about how tasks would unfold. But the betting irregularities were just the beginning. Cedric had also been monitoring the tournament's security arrangements through casual conversations with staff and careful observation of the grounds. What he found was deeply troubling. The maze for the third task wasn't being constructed by Hogwarts staff or even ministry officials. Instead, it was being built by outside contractors, people no one seemed to know much about, working at odd hours and avoiding contact with students and faculty. Through his friend Ernie Macmillan, whose father worked in the Department for Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, Cedric learned that several of these contractors had criminal records. Not major crimes, but the kind of background that should have disqualified them from working at a school event. Cedric had arranged to meet with someone about all this. A seventh-year Ravenclaw whose family had connections in the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, and had been asking uncomfortable questions about tournament safety protocols. The meeting was scheduled for the night before the third task, in an empty classroom where they could talk privately. According to his roommate Ernie Macmillan, Cedric left the dormitory at 11:30 that night, carrying his notebook and wearing the kind of expression that suggested he was about to learn something he really didn't want to know. He returned 2 hours later, and Ernie later described him as looking like someone had just explained that everything he believed about the world was wrong. Not angry, exactly, but deeply shaken and grimly determined. Cedric spent the rest of the night writing furiously in his notebook, occasionally stopping to stare out the window with the kind of expression that suggested he was trying to figure out how to do the right thing, when the right thing might get him killed. Because here's what Cedric had learned in the midnight meeting. The Triwizard Tournament had been compromised from the beginning, not by some elaborate international conspiracy, but by something much simpler and much more dangerous: corruption within the ministry itself. Certain officials had been taking bribes to provide advance information about tasks, security arrangements, and even champion selection. The tournament wasn't rigged in the sense of predetermined outcomes, but it was being manipulated to maximize profit for people who were betting with inside information. The fourth champion situation wasn't a magical accident. It was a deliberate manipulation designed to create chaos and unpredictability that would allow for even more profitable betting scenarios. Someone had wanted Harry Potter in that tournament, not because of some grand, dark plot, but because his presence would create the kind of dramatic uncertainty that makes gamblers throw caution to the wind. And the maze? The maze was where things got really dangerous, because those outside contractors weren't just building obstacles and placing creatures. They were installing monitoring equipment, magical devices that would allow certain people to track champion movements and potentially intervene if outcomes weren't developing as desired. Cedric had stumbled onto a corruption scandal that reached into the highest levels of the ministry, and he had enough evidence to prove it. Names of officials taking bribes, documentation of betting irregularities, and testimony from multiple witnesses who'd observed suspicious behavior. Which is why, on the morning of the third task, Cedric Diggory made the decision that would cost him his life. He was going to report everything to the Daily Prophet after the tournament concluded. Win or lose, he was planning to expose the corruption and demand a full investigation. He told exactly 3 people about his plan: Cho Chang, his head of house, Professor Sprout, and the 7th-year Ravenclaw who'd provided him with the crucial information. All three of them tried to talk him out of it. All three of them warned him that he was dealing with people who had already demonstrated they were willing to break laws to protect their interests. But Cedric was 17, principled, and absolutely convinced that exposing corruption was worth any personal risk. The maze was scheduled to begin at dusk. Cedric spent the afternoon in quiet preparation, reviewing his notes one final time and ensuring they were safely hidden where his friends could find them if something happened to him. He seemed calm, but determined, according to those who saw him that day. The last person to see him before the task was Professor Sprout, who encountered him near the greenhouse as he made his way to the maze entrance. She later told investigators that he seemed nervous but resolute, and that he assured her he would be careful during the task. "I'll see you after this is all over, Professor," he told her, "and then we'll have some important conversations about fair play." An hour later, the tournament began. 4 champions entered the maze. Only 3 came out alive. The official story was simple, tragic, and mostly true. Cedric Diggory, a 17-year-old Hufflepuff prefect and Quidditch captain, had been killed by the Dark Lord during a resurrection ceremony in a graveyard. A victim of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught up in events beyond his control or understanding. The wizarding world mourned. Hogwarts held a memorial service, and absolutely everyone agreed that his death was a terrible tragedy that could never have been prevented. Except for 3 people who knew there was more to the story. Cho Chang, Professor Sprout, and the 7th-year Ravenclaw who'd been helping Cedric had a problem. They knew Cedric had been investigating tournament corruption. They knew he'd planned to expose it. And while his death might have been at Voldemort's hands, the circumstances that led him to that graveyard were far too convenient to be coincidental. But they also knew that speaking up immediately would likely accomplish nothing except getting them targeted by the same corrupt officials Cedric had been investigating. So they waited. They grieved publicly and planned privately. And over the next 2 years, they carefully and secretly gathered additional evidence to support what Cedric had already discovered. The breakthrough came in 1996, when the Ministry finally acknowledged Voldemort's return and began investigating Death Eater infiltration of government departments. Suddenly, officials who had seemed untouchable were being scrutinized, and their financial records were being examined for signs of corruption. The Ravenclaw student's family contact, now working directly with the reformed Auror office, was able to access betting records and financial transactions that had been sealed during the original tournament investigation. What they found confirmed everything Cedric had suspected, and more. The tournament corruption went deeper than anyone had imagined. Ministry officials hadn't just been taking bribes for information. They'd been actively manipulating events to ensure profitable outcomes. The 4th champion situation had been orchestrated specifically to create betting opportunities, and certain officials had made enormous profits from advanced knowledge of how events would unfold. But here's where the story gets truly sinister. Those same corrupt officials had been in contact with known Death Eater sympathizers who were also profiting from the tournament manipulation. When Cedric's investigation threatened to expose the corruption, word had reached people who were far more dangerous than simple ministry bureaucrats. The real breakthrough came when Aurors captured Barty Crouch Jr. In the chaotic moments before he received the Dementor's kiss, Crouch made several statements under extreme duress that were witnessed by multiple ministry officials. These statements, later corroborated by financial evidence and witness testimony, revealed that his mission hadn't just been to ensure Harry Potter's participation in the tournament. He'd also been ordered to eliminate anyone who might expose the corruption that was funding Death Eater operations. According to the corroborated evidence, Cedric's death hadn't been random collateral damage. The plan had always been to kill whoever reached the Triwizard Cup alongside Harry Potter. Not because they cared specifically about witnesses to Voldemort's resurrection, but because they needed to eliminate the threat to their financial operations. The port key was designed to transport both champions to the graveyard, where Voldemort would eliminate whoever accompanied Harry while also serving his own resurrection purposes. When corrupt ministry officials learned it was Cedric who would likely reach the cup, they were pleased in retrospect. His investigation had been causing them significant concern, and his death would solve multiple problems at once. The trials that followed were swift and comprehensive. The ministry corruption investigation expanded to include anyone who had profited from tournament manipulation, and the financial assets of everyone involved were seized and redistributed to victims' families and educational reform initiatives. 7 ministry officials received prison sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years. 3 were found to have direct connections to Death Eater operations and received life sentences in Azkaban. And the betting syndicates that had profited from the corruption were completely dismantled. But perhaps the most fitting tribute to Cedric's memory came from an unexpected source. In 1998, Hogwarts established the Diggory Award for Student Integrity, recognizing students who demonstrate exceptional moral courage in the face of institutional pressure. Cedric Diggory died because he refused to ignore corruption when he saw it. He died because he believed that doing the right thing was more important than staying safe. And he died because some people will kill to protect their profits, even if it means murdering a student who was simply trying to ensure fair play. But in the end, the truth came out. Justice was served, and Cedric's legacy lives on in every student who asks uncomfortable questions and refuses to accept convenient lies. The wizarding world lost a good person when Cedric Diggory died, but his death wasn't meaningless. The corruption he died investigating was exposed and eliminated. The people responsible for his death faced justice, and the reforms implemented in his memory helped ensure that future magical competitions would be conducted with the integrity he believed they deserved. And on that note, thank you for joining me for another episode of Fantasy Case Files. If you found this case as compelling as I did, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what magical world you'd like me to investigate next. Until then, keep asking questions, keep demanding answers, and remember, sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to look the other way.